Namandab, namandab, namandab. Okay, thank you everyone. Welcome again to our first Dharma Family Service for May. We're still under the shelter-in-place order, and so we're still here on YouTube. Last couple of weeks I've had a special guest with Lion, but I had a request from another special guest, so this week we're going to have a little bit of Gary T. Groundhog. Gary's here. I know Gary for a bunch of reasons. I think about when we first met, must have been about 15 years ago, right? Gary was at the old BCA bookstore, which at that time was on Octavia Street, in the same building as BCA headquarters and, right next door to Buddhist Church of San Francisco. And I met Gary there. And at that point, I wasn't a minister yet. So I've known Gary longer than I've been a minister. Right? I became a minister in 2006, which is 14 years ago? I think I've known Gary for 15, 16 years. Wow, huh? And that's when we met. And so the BCA is kind of part of it, right? And the bookstore are part of me being able to know Gary and Gary being here today. Another reason is because the person working at the bookstore, Jerry Bollock, who is also over at Buddhist Church of San Francisco, I already knew him when I walked in the bookstore that fateful day when I met Gary T. Groundhog. And I knew Jerry because we had gone to Japan on a study tour together. Several years before that, when I was a student, it was an Institute of Buddhist Studies study tour of Japan. And a whole bunch of us went, I think 15, 20 people. And so, when I walked in the bookstore that day, I knew Jerry. And so I think that's partly why probably Jerry let Gary come with me. So he was no longer at the bookstore. He came over to my house, right? And he's been with me ever since. So that's kind of two things I can think of, right? BCA is one connection. IBS is another connection. There's another connection, there's another acronym, UPS, because Gary worked for UPS. He's got the little UPS emblem here on his vest. He's got the brown vest like UPS drivers wear. And also, so I was thinking UPS is part of why I know him too. So, they had a commercial, I guess, called Guaranteed Ground. That's what's written on here, Guaranteed Ground. I guess that means that, it's ground delivery and it's guaranteed. So I think that's where Gary T. Groundhog comes from, Guaranteed Ground, Gary T. Groundhog, right? So if it wasn't for BCA, IBS, UPS, we would never have met. He wouldn't have come to my house. He wouldn't be here at BCO, huh? So very glad for all those reasons that I was able to meet Gary and that he's able to be with us here today. Now, Buddhism has a kind of special, it's got a bunch of words actually, but one of the special words I kind of like is causes and conditions. Causes and conditions. Causes are kind of the immediate reason. Right, so the immediate cause, maybe I could say, I went to the BCA bookstore and he was there. Maybe is the immediate cause, the main cause, the primary cause. But there's also conditions. There's also these other reasons, right? So like UPS having a commercial, Guaranteed Ground, right? That's one of the conditions that allowed us to meet. I wasn't getting something from UPS or anything, and yet UPS is part of why we were able to meet, right? So all these causes and conditions, we call it. So some of them I know. And so today when I was thinking, we were thinking about how we first met, and so I could think of some of the things, right? Buddhist Churches of America, Institute of Buddhist Studies, United Parcel Service, and other people as well, maybe, right? But you know what? There's a whole bunch of reasons I'm not aware of. So many reasons that we were able to meet, right? So many causes and conditions that make it so that we're able to be here today. Sometimes I think about myself, and I like music, right? And so I was born early 1970s, and so when I was a teenager, I was growing up in the 80s, and that's not my favorite music. I know there's some good music from the 80s. What's good depends on the person. For me personally, though, I like the music of the 60s and 70s better. So sometimes I find myself thinking, I was born too late. I wish I'd been born maybe 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier, and then I could have enjoyed the music that I love, right? But if I had been born at a different time in a different place, I would be a totally different person. So many of the causes and conditions would be so completely different that who knows what would have happened if I was born at a different time. Right? So even though it can be kind of fun to imagine or kind of fantasize about, what would it be like if I'd been born in this place instead of that place, or this year instead of that year, we can kind of think about that. But the reality is, my life, it's special because of my experiences. Right? Our relationship is special because of our experiences and the causes and conditions that brought us together. Right? That enabled for us to meet. So we don't really talk in Buddhism so much about fate. Sometimes other religions or just in general, people talk about fate. It was meant to be. Right? In Buddhism, I think it's more, causes and conditions. Right? We were so fortunate that the causes and conditions lined up. Right, that the causes and conditions made it possible for us to meet and become friends. So it's kind of like last week when we talked about itadakimasu. Right, itadakimasu was talking about food, and before we eat a meal, kind of acknowledging our gratitude, right, for all the causes and conditions making that meal possible. But it's not just for food, it's not just for things, it's for relationships too. Right? And we realize, the relationships that I have, whether it's my family or my friends or my teachers or church, right? That they're not just two people happening to meet. That there's all these causes and conditions behind it, right? That we're in this kind of web of causes and conditions. Now, sometimes like now, things can be kind of difficult. Right? Things like Reverend Yamaoka, I remember him saying when I was a student, he would say, life doesn't always go the way we want. Right? Things don't always go according to plan. Sometimes things get difficult. Sometimes things go a different way than we planned or than we wanted. Right? And so that's part of what Buddhism talks about when it says life is suffering. Sometimes it can seem like a storm. Right, that we're just buffeted by the waves, that the wind is blowing us. We want to go this way. The wind is so strong we can barely move, right? And it's cold and we're wet and damp and that things are difficult sometimes. But the Buddhism and the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, just like we recited, the three refuges, right? That in Buddhism, the Buddha, his teachings, the Dharma, the truth that he taught, and the Sangha, the community, that those are a refuge. And they use a metaphor. It's like finding a tree. Like the wind is blowing and it's raining and you're all wet and cold. And then you find a tree and you can go under the tree. And then you're not hit so much. It gives you shelter, right, from the storm. That's refuge. That's what we talk about when we're doing the three treasures, right? That Buddhism can be a refuge for us in difficult times. Sometimes we don't realize and we're just upset. Life isn't going the way we want and we don't like it. Maybe Buddhism can show us some alternatives, right? That even though things aren't going the way we want, maybe we can find some other things in our life that we're grateful for, right? We can reflect on our relationships and realize, these relationships are really important. Whether it's my family, friends, other people, sometimes people we don't even know. Right? And that through these relationships, we're sustained. Through these relationships, we also may find a refuge. And so I want to thank Gary for coming and sharing his story with us. Right? Aren't you glad you came? Yeah. I want to thank you for coming and viewing our service here on YouTube. Really grateful, too, that we have these means to be able to still see the temple, to still be able to listen to the Dharma. And really appreciate you being here. So why don't we conclude the Dharma message with Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Naman Naman.